In the heart of rural Bavaria, 1922, an entire family vanished in a way that's still sending chills down spines more than 100 years later. The Hinterkaifeck massacre wasn't just another unsolved crime. It's a case where the killer didn't just murder, but lingered, sleeping above the corpses, feeding the animals, living in the house as if nothing had happened. 6 people, all gone. No one saw the murderer enter or leave. The horror, though, goes even deeper. Whoever did it had been spying on the family for months, maybe even years, watching them through holes carved in the attic floor, keeping meticulous track of every secret and every weakness. Now, the horror of Hinterkaifeck isn't just about the brutality of the crime. It's about the twisted presence lurking above, literally within the same walls, unseen, but all-seeing. Imagine coming home at night, locking your doors, thinking you're safe, and not knowing someone's observing your every move from just a few feet above. And this wasn't just madness confined to 1920s Germany. Across Europe, and even through the 20th century, similar cases hit the headlines, like the Denver Spider-Man, who lived in the attic of a house for months, even after murdering the homeowner. The pure terror of the intruder who never leaves is universal and timeless. Before we continue, I need to know, has a story ever made you double-check your attic? Tell us where you're watching from and drop a comment if you're new to Vault of Vile. And of course, hit subscribe because what's coming will leave you uneasy every time you hear a floorboard creak. The Gruber family looked pretty normal from a distance. Andreas, the patriarch, ran the Hinterkaifeck farm with an iron grip. His wife, Cecilia, had been the original owner. But after their marriage, Andreas took control, not just of the land, but of every life under his roof. Their adult daughter, Victoria, moved back in after her husband was killed in World War I, bringing along her 2 children, little Cecilia, age 7, and Joseph, just a toddler. If you strolled past the farm, it might have seemed like life was simple. But the neighbors whispered. They talked about angry shouts at night, the kids disappearing for days and coming back pale and thin, no explanations offered. But that wasn't the worst of it. Over the years, stories spread that Andreas and Cecilia's other children had vanished without any real trace. No burials, no official records, just silent gaps in a crowded family tree. The truth, as some former employees and villagers hinted, was chilling. Punishments here weren't just strict. They were cruel. If the children ever stepped out of line, Andreas reportedly locked them in the basement, sometimes for days, no food, no light, no water. It was cold, damp, and almost medieval. The local villagers said Cecilia only survived because Andreas had plans for her. And years later, those plans would see him arrested for incest. You might think stories like this are rare, but even today, disturbing secrets sometimes fester in isolated places. Rural Europe in the early 20th century, especially family-run farms, saw more than one family's dirty laundry hidden behind thick forest walls. Cases of hidden abuse and missing children pop up in archives from France, Austria, and the UK during those decades, always with the same sick pattern. A father controlling a household, kids vanishing, neighbors too afraid to ask questions. So what would you do if you started hearing chilling screams from a nearby farm and nobody seemed to care? Let's talk about it in the comments. Because what happened next at Hinterkaifeck would bring terror not just to this family, but to anyone who got close to their secrets. But the strangest things were still to come, because for the next person to join the household, the nightmare was just beginning. For the new maid, Krechensrieger, the dread began right away. She was used to hard farm life, but nothing prepared her for Hinterkaifeck. On her first night, she heard it, slow, repeated footsteps right above her ceiling, even though everyone else slept downstairs. Sometimes it was tapping, sometimes muffled whispers, like people quietly arguing above her bed. Krechens tried to brush it off. Farms creak, right? But then her belongings started moving. clothes folded one evening were thrown everywhere the next morning. Worse yet, her doorknob would rattle in the night, as if someone tried to come in. One night she saw it, a shadow at her window, just standing and watching. She confronted Andreas, but he only shrugged, went up with a lantern, and found nothing. At least, that's what he claimed. What neither of them knew was that the attic floor wasn't whole. Several boards had been removed, leaving precise holes above each bedroom, perfect for spying. If Andreas had checked more carefully, he would have seen that someone was watching their every move. The noises became routine. Footsteps, low voices, giggles, or arguing drifting from above. The family denied everything when she asked. But Andreas finally started showing his nerves, triple-checking locks, keeping tools under his bed, glancing constantly at the forest. Crescens realized it wasn't just in her head. This kind of psychological torment isn't unique. There are modern cases, in Japan, in the US, and the UK, of people secretly living in walls or attics, watching families for months before attacking or being discovered. Victims often report the same pattern. Weird sounds, lost objects, the sense of being intruded upon but no proof, until it's far too late. If this part is giving you chills, share with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Crescens saved herself by leaving, claiming the house was haunted, refusing to stay even after the family begged. She grabbed her baby, fled the farm, and never looked back. Crescens escaped, but for the Grubers, the real nightmare was only getting started. After the maid left, isolation wrapped around the Gruber family even tighter. They withdrew from the village, barely seen in town, always appearing tense and wary. It wasn't just nerves. Strange things began piling up. In February 1922, Andreas found a Munich newspaper on his doorstep. No one on the farm subscribed, and when he asked the mailman and neighbors, nobody had delivered it. It was as if someone was inside the property, leaving warnings or twisted messages. Worse followed. The door to the machine house showed fresh crowbar marks, like someone tried to break in without waking the dogs or family. A set of household keys vanished quietly, never seen again. Andreas was checking every lock 3 times each night. Victoria clung to her children, never letting them outside without her. Imagine living in such fear, where even a missing key could feel like a death sentence. But the most haunting sign came days before the massacre. After a late snowfall, Andreas spotted a line of crisp footprints leading out of the woods straight to his back door. None led away. Whoever crept up to the farmhouse never left, at least not on the same path. He scoured the snow, but the tracks started in the forest, not on any known trail, and ended at his house, as if the visitor had materialized from thin air. Back then, rural police had few tools and little training for crimes like these. Bavaria's cops were overwhelmed by post-war shortages and old habits. Reports of strangers hiding in forests weren't taken seriously. In Germany, as in other European countries, tales of Waldmenschen, forest people, were both folklore and cautionary rumor. Now, here's something to think about. If you found footsteps leading to your house with no prints going back out, would you call police or try handling it yourself? Comment below. Would you trust someone else with your safety, or would you take it into your own hands? But Andreas didn't call for help. He rationalized the evidence away, just like so many of us do with things we can't explain. It cost his family everything. What happened next would become one of history's most chilling unsolved mass murders. The chill of March 31st, 1922, settled over Hinterkaifeck like a curse. That afternoon, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, finally arrived after almost a year without household help. Her sister came along, stayed for tea, and left, making Maria the last person outside the Gruber family known to see them alive. Andreas was on edge all day, watching the woods. Victoria tried to act normal, but the stress was obvious. The children clung close. Even Maria, new to the tense rhythms of the house, sensed something was off. That night, doors were locked and checked, again and again. But safety was an illusion. Investigators, piecing together the horrors after the fact, believe Andreas left the house first, maybe chasing a sound from the barn. The killer waited there, using Andreas' own modified hatchet, once designed for trench combat. Andreas was felled by a single, professional blow. His body was dragged into the back of the barn and hidden under hay. Next came Victoria, then her mother Cecilia, then 7-year-old Cecilia, each lured or searching for the others, each slaughtered with the same cruel efficiency. Forensics in later decades compared these wounds to family annihilation cases in other countries. Often, the most violence is reserved for those closest to the killer. Little Cecilia's ordeal especially horrified investigators. She survived her injuries for hours, pulling out her own hair in terror and pain. Sexual assault evidence and wounds from both the hatchet and a knife, found hidden years later, pointed to a deep, personal rage. Maria was murdered in her room, likely as she unpacked. Joseph, only 2 years old, was killed in his crib with a single brutal blow. 6 people wiped out. The entire family and their new maid erased in the span of hours. And this is the part that still baffles criminal profilers. The killer didn't rush away. Instead, they settled in, updating the family calendar as if nothing had happened. If you're still with us, smash that like button. We're only halfway through this dark labyrinth, and the next part will make you question what a person is capable of when nobody's watching. For the next 4 days, no one realized that something unspeakable had happened inside Hinterkaifeck. The killer didn't just hide. He maintained the illusion of life. Each morning, neighbors saw smoke rising from the chimney, just as before. The animals were cared for. Cows milked, pigs fed, chickens let outside. Someone picked up the mail and left it in the Gruber's usual spot. Even the family dog was moved from his remote tie-out to near the front door, as if to say, "Everything's normal here." Visitors came and went, never suspecting the truth. 2 coffee sellers knocked at the door, left their wares and walked away, assuming no one was home. A mechanic worked for hours repairing the farm engine, watched, most likely, from the attic by the unseen resident. He later told police that the place felt strangely deserted, but nothing seemed truly wrong. The killer's calm was chilling. Meanwhile, evidence left behind showed that the murderer had truly settled in. Straw in the attic was flattened into a makeshift bed. Scraps of food and human waste suggested someone lived up there for days. The attic holes, discovered later, let them track movement throughout the house. In a failed attempt to hide the crime, the killer tried to dig graves in the barn floor, but the Bavarian winter kept the earth frozen solid. So they just heaped more hay over the bodies and waited for discovery. Psychologists have studied cases like this, where murderers linger, sometimes meticulously living among victims or maintaining normal routines. It's a pattern seen in only a handful of crimes around the world, always signaling a disturbing level of detachment and control. Was the killer savoring their crime or just biding time before escape? Either way, their actions made the scene more horrifying. How do you explain someone living with 6 corpses for 4 days, eating their food, feeding their animals? Let us know in the comments. And before we move on to the investigation, make sure you've subscribed. These details only get darker. It all unraveled on April 4th, when the neighbors finally stopped by to check on the Grubers. The animals were restless, and the whole property was still. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, one of the closest neighbors, sensed something was terribly wrong when his sons reported a weird silence and hungry livestock. He gathered 2 other men and headed for Hinterkaifeck. They found the yard gates open, but no sign of the family. The barn door was bolted from inside, so they forced it open. What they discovered inside changed Germany's history. Under piles of hay, the bodies of Andreas, Victoria, grandmother Cecilia, and little Cecilia lay battered and hidden. Meanwhile, The house itself was locked tight. Lorenz used a key, some say suspiciously quickly, to get inside. There, they found baby Joseph murdered in his crib, and Maria, the doomed maid, lifeless in her bedroom. 6 bodies spread between house and barn. But the horror didn't stop there. Lorenz reportedly moved bodies, rearranged things inside the home, and contaminated the scene, whether on purpose or out of shock. By the time police arrived, dozens of villagers had already trudged through every room. Some even cooked meals in the Gruber kitchen, unknowingly trampling potential evidence. The sense of disbelief was so strong, people acted as if the nightmare couldn't possibly be real. This contaminated crime scene would haunt the investigation forever. Even today, authorities are trained to lock down a scene immediately. But back in 1922, this was not the norm in rural Bavaria. That chaos, plus the shock from witnesses who'd seen nothing to prepare them for such violence, meant vital clues vanished before anyone even realized they mattered. Would you dare step foot into a house like that, knowing what might be waiting inside? Tell us in the comments. Because as shocking as the discovery was, the investigation would only make things even stranger. The crime scene that greeted investigators was almost impossible to process. By the time Inspector Georg Reingruber arrived, it was chaos. Fingerprints smudged, footprints erased, evidence handled by dozens of local hands. The police set up camp, hoping for answers. Instead, the case only grew more bizarre. First, a hasty autopsy was performed on an old wooden table right in the barn. The wounds were as brutal as anything modern pathologists had seen. Hatchet marks, repeated blows, clear signs of savage rage. The murder weapon, a special axe Andreas had altered for trench fighting, was missing. The most chilling findings were about little Cecilia and her mother. There were clear indicators of sexual violence, and Cecilia had survived long hours after the assault, pulling out her own hair in agony. Theories sprang up immediately. The first idea, robbery, didn't add up. Cash and valuables were left untouched, stashed in open drawers or hidden according to local custom. Only a large sum that Victoria had withdrawn weeks before was gone, leading some to believe the killer knew exactly where she'd put it. This pointed investigators towards someone close to the family. Then came the wildest twists. The heads of all 6 victims were removed and sent to Munich for mystical analysis. That even meant consulting a psychic for answers, a testament to their desperation. Modern police now look back and marvel at how uncertainty and superstition shaped the investigation. Suspects soon piled up. Lorenz Schlittenbauer acted suspiciously at the scene. He'd been romantically involved with Victoria, might have been Joseph's father, and had easy access to the locked house. But his health was poor, and the violence didn't really fit his profile. Was he sneaking inside for revenge, or out of morbid curiosity? Another theory, Victoria's dead husband Carl Gabriel had faked his death and returned, crazed by family secrets. Still more speculated about paramilitary gangs or wandering serial killers. Decades later, researchers suggested Paul Muller, suspected in American family massacres, might have returned to Germany and committed this crime. Modern forensics have tried to make sense of all this. DNA evidence, however, hasn't survived. Even contemporary pattern analysis and criminal profiling haven't revealed a clear answer. Online, true crime communities spin dozens of theories. Was it an inside job? A cover-up? A local? A madman from farther away? What's your theory? An angry neighbor, a wrong lover, or a total stranger? Let's talk about it in the comments. Before we share the final discoveries, make sure to ring the bell, because you will not want to miss what was found decades later. A year after the massacre, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was torn down. Workers expected only ruins, but what they found in the attic cast a whole new shadow over the case. Wedged in the beams was the missing hatchet, the very one Andreas had modified for war, crusted in dried blood and human hair. Next to it, a blood-stained knife. Forensic experts believed it was probably the second weapon used on little Kazelia. But it wasn't just about the tools. They also found more of those holes in the attic floor, perfect viewing points into almost every room. The evidence suggested the killer had lived above the family for weeks or months, watching, learning, waiting. Not only that, but hiding the weapons so well pointed to a chilling possibility. The murderer might have planned to come back, maybe even intended Hinterkaifeck as a long-term home. Decades passed, but the puzzle stayed unsolved. Repeat investigations brought new eyes, even modern cold case units from the Bavarian Police Academy. In 2007, a team reviewed every clue and announced they'd reached a consensus about the killer's identity, but refused to release the name, saying living relatives could be harmed. The secrecy fueled conspiracy theories. Was the killer someone influential, protected by officials, or were they simply never caught? Unsolved cases like this are haunted by the same things: vanishing evidence, tantalizing possibilities, lingering legends. Across Europe, there are dozens of mass murders where the killer simply disappeared, leaving behind a traumatized community. For those close to Hinterkaifeck, the sense of unfinished business never faded. Few dared to build on that land again. If you've ever found yourself endlessly searching articles and forums, trying to solve a mystery no one else can let go of, hit like and subscribe for more stories just like this. The final lesson of Hinterkaifeck isn't just about evil acts. It's about how some secrets die in the shadows, while their echoes still chill us, even 100 years later. But before we finish, there's still one lesson that might haunt you any time you hear something from above. The case of Hinterkaifeck is more than just an old mystery. It's a lasting warning about the darkness that might live right next door, or even under your own roof. Despite a century of rumors, memorials, and morbid fascination, the most terrifying element is still the humanity behind it all. The monster wasn't a ghost from the woods or an urban legend. It was a person who observed, blended in, and struck when nobody expected. To this day, a small memorial stands where the house once was, a stark reminder for anyone wandering those Bavarian woods. Locals still refuse to build there. Psychologists say unsolved mass murders like these leave behind a legacy of generational trauma. Families grow up scared, always wondering if someone is watching, if unanswered questions are safer left alone. The very idea of someone living above you, watching through the floor, chills us to our core. It's an ugly truth repeated in other unsolved massacres around the world. Families who never get closure, towns where the past feels like it's just hiding out of sight. Historians, writers, and cold case detectives all look back and see lingering lessons. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we trust, who know our routines and weaknesses. Sometimes, even the most advanced investigations aren't enough. Evidence fades, secrets rot away, and communities are forced to live with what they'll never know. Whether it's the descendants of the Grubers, the living relatives of investigators, or true crime fans obsessed to this day, the shadow remains. So which theory do you believe? Was the killer a neighbor, a twisted relative, a drifter, or someone protected by powerful friends? Did investigators really discover the truth and hide it? Let's debate below. Thanks for coming this far into the darkness with me. Subscribe for the next deep dive into history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Until then, lock your doors, check the attic, and trust your instincts. Sometimes, what you don't see is the scariest part of all.